I'm Holly, I'm a writer, and this is my TBR video for the next however long. Although I am not super strict with my TBRs, I'm a mood reader, so I usually kind of think, is this something that I want to read at the moment when I'm picking a book after I've just finished one. I'm currently reading Royal Assassin, and I'm actually doing like a reading vlog for this, so I'm only on chapter 3 currently. I started it today and then I stopped reading it to take a nap, so I will probably be a while. It's about 700 pages, so yeah, it's gonna be a while before I read any of these, but I kind of want to have a little video saying which ones I think I'm gonna read next, because some of them are ones that I'm like reading for kind of interesting reasons. So the first one is The Man in the Iron Mask. This is the same series as The Three Musketeers, which I read last year and I loved. So I immediately was like, I need to get this book and then read it. But then I kind of was in a bit of a weird mood, so I ended up reading a lot more non-fiction after I read The Three Musketeers. But I want to read this soon, and it's a lot shorter. I think, how many pages is it, like 450? Basically. So it's not that long, and I probably will read this pretty soon. But also, it depends if I'm in the mood for a classic. The spine, I need to clean this, because it's like being weird. But yeah. That's one that I'm kind of excited for. Another that I'm kind of excited for because I read something recently. I finished reading Pet Sematary by Stephen King, which I had read the first, I think it was basically the first half. I read to part 2, which was like halfway through the book, page count wise. And I didn't enjoy it that much, but I have heard really good things about Misery, which I bought a few years ago. And yeah, I mean, this cover is part of the reason why I got it, and I love these spine ones, like the way that these editions look. I think they're really nice. I only have 3 of them, but I'm not a huge Stephen King fan actually, but I think this is supposed to be really, really good, and especially like if you're a writer, it's one of those ones that's meant to be kind of special. So yeah, I read one of his recently, and I think that this could be really interesting for me to read as somebody who is a writer and therefore wants to read about a writer writing about a writer who is writing in the story, and it's like kind of meta in that sense. The next one is Jenson Button's How to Be an F1 Driver. He obviously, he was a winner, but I think that I've heard good things about these. These are supposed to be quite funny as well as like being interesting. I find that the hardest thing about writing a book about Formula One is that the research usually shows things like the logistics side of Formula One, about how they get from one place to another on the globe with all of the equipment, how they build a car, how the teams operate. I want to learn more about the drivers and how they feel, because I am writing about a driver, and so I want to know what kind of mindset she would be in different things while she's driving. And I actually haven't read that many like biographies. I plan on reading the Lauda one, James Hunt's, his one, and then I think there's a Prost one as well. So I do plan on reading these. Jenson also has another one which I think is How to Be a World Champion or something, and I don't have that one. This is the only one that I have. I think that's actually, that is the last Formula One book that I own that I haven't read yet, besides a huge one which is not about modern Formula One necessarily. So this is like technically the last research book that I own for that world, and it's kind of been nice to not have to read them and feel like I'm rushing through them just because I want to write more. And I'm hoping that maybe I can read this, and then I'm gonna do a reread of the book that I'm querying at the end of February. So depending on whether or not I sort of get into that as soon as I'm expecting to, or if I get to this faster than I think. It might be nice to kind of, with fresh eyes, look at my own book with this in mind. So that's why that's there. This one, this is just a me thing, this is just an interest. It's The Wager. This is one of those books, the author, he's very popular. This I saw when it was a hardback, and I was like, no, I'll wait for the paperback. It came out in paperback. And I think it'll be really interesting to read. I also listened to an audiobook. My library had a copy of Killers of the Flower Moon, which is the same author. They have matching covers. They all have like the white border with the sort of like the picture and like the same font, I think. But the other one that I wanted to read of his actually is, I think it's called The Lost City of Z. So I think I'll probably buy those two books, but this is the only one I have for now, and I'm kind of excited by it, but also, even though his writing seems to be quite engaging, almost like a story, you know, like a fictional story, I think that it still is something that's going to be kind of heavy, and especially because it's kind of like a legal case. I feel like I need to be in a headspace where I'm capable of taking in facts. Sometimes you read something like this which is factual and it's kind of like funny and you learn stuff, but also you're just having a good time. And then sometimes you read something like this which is factual and you maybe still have a good time learning about it, but you have to take it a bit more seriously because it's like an important part of history that you have to learn about. And I think for me, Killers of the Flower Moon, that one I really enjoyed, and it was one that I sat and I listened to the audiobook and I stared and I was just like, yeah, this is, oh my god, this is interesting. And I think if that's this, then I need to be prepared for that. So I probably won't be reading that soon, but if I get into a mood where I'm like, you know what, I just want a really good, interesting non-fiction. I then have Emily Wilson's The Odyssey. I actually have both of hers. She has The Odyssey and then she has The Iliad, which came out in paperback. I think it came out paperback in 2024. It's like at the very end. But I got it in paperback because I was like, I want it to be the same as this one, and they're different sizes. So I'm a little annoyed about that. But basically something that I've heard is that her translations are faithful, but they're not super flowery. I'm not a hugely flowery writer. I think I've spoken about this. And I'm not a fan of reading that sort of stuff either. I like books that are sort of very modern, they get to the point, they talk about important stuff, they do a little bit of description, but they don't linger on things that are unnecessary. These translations have been criticised because they're not as flowery, so people think that they're not as important or not as like good, but apparently they are actually very, very important in terms of the content that they cover, and that they portray things in a way that is readable and kind of follows the tradition of being able to read this out loud and have it be lyrical. So I'm kind of excited about this. I've never read The Odyssey before, but I know the story. I'm not, I studied it in school at least once, maybe more than once. I think, yeah, but I remember it pretty well. I mean, it's a kind of simple story when you put it down to its bones. Obviously, I've seen like a bunch of adaptations of it, like the SpongeBob movie, which came out. I've seen A Brother, Where Art Thou? I think that it's catching the light, so I'm like a magpie. I just see that and I'm like, oh my god, wow. This is why I picked it up, by the way. This book, I worked at a bookshop for a few years, and when this came in, whenever it was, I was like, I need this because this is beautiful. And the deckled edge, I love it. So yeah, and I do like that even though it's paperback, it's got these like flaps, because it kind of feels very sturdy. Like I don't feel like I'm at risk of breaking the spine and damaging it. But I do actually have 2 editions of the Iliad. I have a version of the Iliad that I bought because I thought it was important that I own it, and I saw a copy that I liked, and I don't usually like copies of books like this because I think that they either go for something really beautiful but impractical, or they go for something that's kind of ugly. Might be weird to say that, but I do care about the visuals of the books that I own, because if I'm buying them, I'm gonna keep them probably forever. There are very few books that I would get rid of, and they're either books that I've grown out of and will never reread, or they're books that like I hated. So if a book is something that is like a classic that I think I'm gonna keep, I want a nice copy of it. And if I like really like it, I'll always rebuy. And then I rebought the Iliad because this like hair copy came out. So I have 2 copies of the Iliad, but I think that I'll read them both and I'll see how I feel about that copy of the Iliad, and if I don't like it, then presumably it will be a sign that I don't need to read a different version of the Odyssey other than this one. But yeah, I don't know when I'm going to read this. I think it's probably going to be a little bit quicker because it is like epic poetry. So rather than like each page being full, it just is, it's verse. And it's like, it's epic poetry, so it's not entirely, you know, it's not like super short, but it is still poetry, and it is still a lot easier and quicker to read than it might seem from looking at like the thickness of it, and because it is a quite tall book. Like if I compare it to a standard paperback, which the other one is the same size as, by the way. But yeah, this is one that I want to read because of that. I think that it seems like it would be nice to actually finally read the story rather than just knowing of it, which is kind of weird because I did study classics for a year, and it somehow never came up. Next book is, well, the next 2 books actually, I think this is a bit of an odd mix. Stephen King is usually quite heavy. Misery especially, I've heard from people that it's like, and then we've got 3 non-fiction, well, 2 non-fiction books, 1 epic poem which was mythology, so it's in a way non-fiction. Reference, shall we say, it's a reference book. And then we have a classic from a long enough time ago that the writing is not modern at all. So these 2. So this is The Lamb by Lucy Rose. I have been following this author on TikTok for a while. I was excited for the release of this book. I immediately bought it as soon as I saw that my local bookshop had it in. It is as well, if I just signed, which I didn't know because there wasn't a sticker on it, I don't think. It's really interesting because the reason why I followed her originally was that the book sounded really interesting, but then also she's like, I think she's got autism and ADHD, and so I'm autistic and I'm a writer, and I feel like there are certain times when my brain just does not let me write, and where I am maybe, you know, it's a problem, it's a disability. And I think that following people who have experiences that aren't dissimilar to mine, even if obviously individuality makes them a little bit different, it's really nice and reassuring. And to see that she got, you know, published and talk about her journey so openly, about how it can sometimes be a struggle. She talked about the trouble to get an agent and stuff like that, and her journey, and I thought that was really interesting and kind of inspiring. And this book sounds right up my alley. Like, I cannot physically explain how much I love a cannibalism book. I think I, a few years ago, said cannibalism is the next best thing that's gonna happen. It's like the next trend. And I was right. A bunch of films came out about cannibalism. There were more books being released about cannibalism. I think people as a whole got a lot more cool about the idea of reading stuff where that was like a theme. But yeah, this book is like a folk horror cannibalism mother-daughter book, and I'm really excited to read it, and I think that it would be nice to get this read. I'm just waiting for a point in time where I'm able to deal with what I'm presuming is going to be quite heavy content. Fictional, so it's not necessarily like as disturbing as real stuff, because I personally find like reading about people who've been murdered in real life and like that sort of stuff is really heavy for me. I feel like it's kind of something that you have to treat with a level of respect, even if it's just in the way that you consume that kind of media. This is fictional, but I think that there are still going to be a lot of things that feel very real and very plausible, and so I am preparing for this to be quite an emotional book as much as it's kind of like a cool, creepy book. So that's whenever I find the sort of space for that. And then finally, kind of different, I would say probably the most light-hearted book fiction-wise on this list, Gold Rush. This one, I actually don't know when I'm going to be reading it, because to put it as simply as I can, this is supposed to be a buddy read. Like, this is one that was recommended, I think, like there's a quote for it or something, by the author of Cleopatra and Frankenstein, but my friend gave it to me, that book, Cleopatra and Frankenstein, for my birthday last year, and then she said that she'd given it to me because she really liked it, and so I was like, hey, I wanted to read this book, and I've just seen that it is apparently kind of like, presumably by the fact that the author of this book that you really like has said that it's good, like that book. So I want to read this with my friend, and whenever she is like ready to read it, whenever she has the time, I think it's really interesting. It's supposed to be, I think, about like celebrity culture. Imagine you just spent the night with the most famous man on the planet, except you don't quite remember it. And it's about how things happen / I guess fall apart after that, about how this man who everyone loves may have done something not good. That's the vibes that I get, and I don't know where it's gonna go, but I think it's really interesting because it is told from the perspective of a woman, like it's the main character is a woman, and I think that it could be a really interesting book, but again, kind of heavy. I don't know why I'm in a heavy mood reading wise, but I guess I just am. Even the book that I'm currently reading, the fantasy, like it's not exactly light, but I think that maybe I'm kind of like how some people nest when there's like a baby coming. I'm preparing for spring and summer, because I already know some of the books that I want to read while it's summery, because in my head they're books that I could read while the sun is coming into my room, and I'm like, so I think maybe that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to get rid of some of the heavier books while I still have a chance. And then obviously you can see two of these are hardbacks. They are new hardbacks. They both came out within the past few months. So yeah, so that's the books that I'd like to read in the next however long. I don't tend to put a sort of timeline on my reading. I do think that kind of makes me less likely to enjoy the books that I read if I'm like, I'm going to read this and then I'm going to read that. It doesn't work that way for me. I have to be in the mood for something, otherwise I'm just going to hate it. If I try and force myself through a book, it does not work. I cannot do it. I will DNF a book before I will make myself read it, no matter what it is. Yeah, okay, I'm kind of rambling now about books. It's how I get with books. I just ramble on and on and on. But yeah, that's my TBR. That's the whole video. Goodbye. Because obviously I wanted it. I didn't buy World War Z, which... World War Z? World War Z? It's Z. Yeah, it's Z. But it's just the letter. Like, it's hard to... The thing is, I hate that letter so much. I hate saying it. I think the only way that I like saying it is if I say Z. World War Z. No. What am I talking about? I know what I'm talking about. Okay,